Hello, my name's Justin the Clue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. People demanded it, and by people...
Who demanded it?
I mean us, because we want the hits. We're doing an episode on Sir Christopher Nolan.
The first part is the pledge.
So, Chris Nolan, he's a director.
What is there to say?
Yeah.
What? This is not virgin terrain, is
No.
it? Everyone's been over this. There's no way that we can say anything about him that won't come across as received wisdom.
So we're going to do what only we can do, and is talk about him in the context of us being teenagers and getting into his films.
Yeah, so when did you were a fan of Christopher Nolan as a teenager? Yeah,
Memento.
Every male, white, upper middle class teenage boy is a Christopher Nolan fan.
It's Fight Club, Memento, and I don't know, what is it, a Snatch, I guess, that you have up in your dorm, I guess.
And, along came Batman Begins.
Oh, yeah, and Batman Begins was so much fun when it came out.
Because, for us as very smart teenagers, we were like, finally, somebody is taking the Batman seriously.
So that's what we should say right off the bat, of what does Christopher Nolan represent, and what is he actually?
I think he represents seriousness.
Yes.
He represents blockbusters with brains. He represents none of that goofy, like, Luc Besson bullshit. None of that Marvel Comics idiocy. Let's have themes, ideas.
He's the filmmaker that's loved by teenagers who want their love of film to be validated.
Yes.
Because he's making movies that are smart, that are twisty, that do more than movies can usually do. And that is represented perfectly with Memento, which is the movie that, as a teenager, you see and you're like, whoa, my mind is blown. This film is shown backwards.
Why do you think his fans love him so much? Because the love that his fans have for him is interesting, because they're out there every time a critic gives his movie 2 stars. They're out there doing death threats, calling women cunts, terrible things.
I think those fans usually come from the Batman side, right? Mm-hmm. Because Batman fans tend to be a very obsessive lot.
Mm-hmm. And they have strong ideas about what the character should be.
Yes, and I think that what the Christopher Nolan Batman films do is kind of solidify the fact that this character can be serious, he can be realistic. Now, whether those films represent that or not is another matter. And that when a critic comes in and says, oh, well, this is not good, that kind of shatters a fan's perception, right? Or not shatter them, just kind of tell them what you like is not good.
Yeah, and they hear the voices of, like, their parents or their school teachers saying, oh, Batman, that's kid stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what hurts them the most and causes them to lash out. And I think it's those Batman films and that fandom that has extended beyond those superhero pictures into Interstellar and even Dunkirk right now.
But I also think there's something about the plots of his movies that really appeals to these people.
Because it makes them feel smart.
Yeah, like, because they have this puzzle box narrative thing where you have to pay extra attention to it. You feel smart for being able to follow it. But also, so many of Nolan's movies are about brilliant, solitary men who... White men who see the world for what it really is and and they're realistic.
Yes, that's right. Even though that films like Memento show that man to be flawed and to be wrong, and so does The Prestige.
Yeah, but ultimately, like, doesn't Memento kind of come down on the side of, does it even matter if the guy kills the right guy?
It doesn't. Yeah. Because the world is still there and it's just his perception of it that matters.
Yeah. Vote Trump.
No, none of that, Will. None of that.
So, Memento, you like it?
Oh, love Memento. Yeah. I watched it today, and it was one of those movies that I went, I don't want to watch Memento. Like, I've seen it so many times when I was a teenager. Like, do I need to watch it again? Guess what? Still holds up.
Does it?
Good movie. Yep.
I've seen it, like, I think I saw it in class at one point. I saw it on my own, of course. I maybe saw it with a friend. I don't think it's a movie that necessarily rewards repeated viewings.
I thought it did when I watched it. Maybe I haven't seen it in, like, 7-8 years.
Yeah.
So it felt fresh, even though I knew all the beats that were coming.
But it's like, I think the novelty of the storytelling style, it's like, it'll never be as good. Maybe this is just my opinion, but it'll be never as good as the first viewing where you're figuring it out.
Well, I think that what Memento does very well is that the story that it's telling, one of like revenge, that Guy Pearce's character wants to find the killer of his wife and the person that robbed him of being able to create new memories, works in a sense that the film is constantly questioning its own premise and finding new ways to approach it, whether it's a character going, you will never remember this, so I can tell you all this stuff, and then when we come back, it's going to be completely different. Or like starting in the middle of an action scene and being like, wait, am I chasing someone? No, I'm being chased. Or it's just the like recontextualizing of stuff that I felt that even though I knew where the story was going, was still fun for me watching it on this viewing.
Oh, you know what else? This just occurred to me. What else I think some of his fans like about him? These fans seem to get really caught up in like the Rotten Tomatoes score. They want that perfect 100% score. And it speaks to an intellectual insecurity. They really value consensus, and I think maybe a lot of people have this. They like to think that there are a couple of things that are absolutes that they can depend on, and like The Dark Knight is absolutely good, and if you don't think it's good, then you're just purposely contrarian.
And the thing about that is, like I said before, it extends to the rest of his movies, right? Because if The Dark Knight is a perfect movie, it's not. It has tons of flaws. Then that means that everything Christopher Nolan makes from that point on must also be perfect.
Yeah, and Christopher Nolan and the people who market him have been able to successfully put him forward as this kind of heir to Kubrick, of this master craftsman
in control of everything.
He's got everything figured out.
Yeah.
And if something seems wrong, that's because you're not smart enough. I don't think Christopher Nolan is anywhere near the equal of Kubrick.
So we should talk about where Christopher Nolan came from, because I think that's interesting in that he didn't come from money, which you would assume watching his films.
I'm surprised to hear that. Wow.
He came from kind of a working class family. He always wanted to make films since he was a kid. Classic, loved Star Wars. And The Following, his first film, was made on weekends. His wife was the producer who's produced all of his films from that point on. Made with friends that he made through film societies and stuff like that.
And it cost £3,500.
And the story goes that they rehearsed it so well that they only ever had to do one take for everything, which is like, yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, I've made movies. I don't believe that. But that plays into his mystique, right? And The Following is that kernel of all the rest of his work, which is a twisty narrative that, oh, you think what's going on, but really you don't, because things have been time shifted.
You know, the puzzle box structure of his movies is fun to follow, but every time I see one, I get the suspicion that it doesn't really add up to much. And by the time the movie is over, I always have this feeling of, that's clever, but is that it?
Yes.
Because I don't think the structure of the movies is fun in the way that like a Sudoku is fun, but it doesn't reveal anything. Like the themes are always laid out in his movies in big clunky monologues. So you don't need the structure to elucidate the themes.
I enjoy The Following, don't love it. Watched it a few days ago and I went, yeah, okay, I can see why it's not a movie that I revisit very often.
I had a pretty good time with it. I just watched it today for the first time. And I thought it was 70 minutes and it was fun and it was in and out. And
it is.
It had a kind of nifty, like little twisty plot. And
it's such a miserable film though, which is like...
But it also had a little bit more of a spark of life that some of his later films don't. Like, I think like the guy who plays the main guy, the guy who follows people, has this mumbly quality that is distinct from the, I think, over-rehearsed quality of some of his later films.
Which is funny considering that Nolan said that he rehearsed to the point that they could do it in only one take.
Yeah, what can I say?
Or maybe they only had that one take, so whatever performance he gave, the one that he had to keep.
But some of the later ones are Christian Bale delivering a long monologue that sounds like he's reciting it off a cue card.
But, like, I think that energy of The Following is crystallized a Memento into a more... successful form, that he's again telling like a noir story, but this time he's doing these cinematic backflips to tell you it, while still having a protagonist in Guy Pearce that is very endearing and can have parts of humor. That's the thing about Christopher Nolan films, is that he is solidified as this humorless director whose films are just kind of very cold, emotionless experiences, which I don't think is necessarily the case, even though that is the image that has been portrayed of him.
I think the humor in his films after Batman Begins is always terrible.
Do
and
you?
always the worst part of his films.
There's a funny gag in The Prestige where Christian Bale does a magic trick and locks one of the prison guards to the table.
Yeah, all right. But I'm thinking of The Dark Knight Rises, which I know you revisited this week.
Ugh.
It has some of the just worst bits of comedy, like when Catwoman and him are in the Batplane and she says, "My mother warned me about getting into cars with strange men," and he goes, "This isn't a car," and then you see it's a plane. Or what about that
The classic bit where he's standing on the rooftop talking to Catwoman, turns his head and she's gone, and he goes, "I guess that's what that feels like."
terrible.
After Memento, which was kind of a critical, probably Sundance darling.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah.
It got an Oscar nomination for screenplay.
He ended up directing a forgotten film, To the Sands of Time, which was a remake of Insomnia.
Yes.
And it has the notable pedigree of starring Robin Williams in a villainous turn.
And Mr. Albert Pacino as the cop.
That's right.
I saw this movie shortly after it came out, thought it was fun, and have not thought about it since until now.
The only thing that I distinctly remember about the film is that on the DVD, Christopher Nolan does a commentary track in the chronological order that the film was shot.
Wow.
So he's talking through these clips and taking you through a journey that he took himself. So, like, the first scene you see in the commentary is the first scene that they shot.
That's kind of interesting.
Yes, I'm sure it's probably a little bit dull and kind of monotone in its delivery.
Man, the master of twists.
I was doing some research about his films online, and supposedly the fairly dull commentary on Memento, if you hit certain buttons at the end, the commentary has an alternate ending, like 3 different choices.
Okay, so he's William Castle.
Yes, but like, why would I go into this? I mean, Memento, the DVD, has a special feature that you can watch the film in chronological order, but only if you hit like 5, 4, 9 over the end credits.
I remember people saying that DVD was so hard to open.
It is hard to open, and it's all busted.
Yeah, so who the fuck wants that?
Insomnia does have an interesting bit of trivia that the fact that the person who got him the job was Steven Soderbergh, who they wanted a different director for Insomnia, and he's like, no, you should get Christopher Nolan to do this.
And like Dr. Frankenstein creating his monster, he would eventually come to regret.
You think they still hang out?
Probably.
Yeah, maybe.
They're both kind of like cold guys who make formalist experiments.
Well, once again,
I like Soderbergh better.
I don't think that Nolan is that cold. Like, what films of his are cold?
Dunkirk.
A little bit. I think it's fairly emotional in the way that it goes and presents stuff. Same thing with Interstellar, which has, like, the famous scene that has been memed into the ground of Matthew McConaughey crying over a video of his children. Or even Inception, which has Leonardo DiCaprio doing the hilarious "No!" after his wife commits suicide.
You talk about Christopher Nolan commentaries, and I was just thinking about how much I don't want to listen to one of those, because Christopher Nolan strikes me as somebody whose company I would not enjoy. I don't like the worldview presented in his films.
And what's the worldview presented in this film?
This kind of Hobbesian worldview. Mm-hmm. Hobbesian with a little bit of, in Interstellar, with a little bit of Ayn Rand.
Yes.
Like in Interstellar, when Matthew McConaughey is like, the planet is being, basically being destroyed by this drought, or is it a dust bowl situation? Yeah. And McConaughey is like, whatever happened to us? We used to be explorers, not caretakers. Which, like, I don't want to get all political, but it sounds a little colonialist to me. and like, Interstellar has a scene where McConaughey goes to his daughter's school, and he finds out that at the school, in the curriculum, they're teaching the kids that the moon landing was faked.
Yeah.
And it has a scene kind of like in Uncle Buck, when Uncle Buck talks to the principal, where McConaughey's like, now listen, I may not have done any fancy book learning, but I know we landed on the moon. And it's all this kind of like, I mean, obviously we're supposed to watch this movie and feel kind of like, okay, here we are in the late Obama era, and our America's glory days behind us, and the way to reclaim our glory is to rediscover our pioneer spirit.
Yeah.
And I think that's dumb.
Okay.
I think give him a living wage instead.
That is true.
Yeah.
But I think that what you're critiquing about the movies is a kind of side effect of who he is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that because
I don't like him.
He's considered so important and so great that you're like, like you can single in on those things.
And it's not only that, it's that he thinks that the way to reclaim greatness is in this Randian idea of, oh, here's this great single man,
Yes.
this great visionary who's going to lead us out of it. And if
You're
society would just get out of his fucking way.
You're more out of the collective will of the people, right? Like
Yeah.
a more Chinese communist.
I'm Bane.
I mean, I don't want to talk about too much about The Dark Knight Rises. I did watch it, much to my chagrin,
Great
for this
film.
podcast. But Will has dedicated what seems like 4 podcasts to this subject. Dark Knight Rises, not a good movie.
What didn't you like about it? My thoughts are well documented.
It's incredibly dull.
Yes.
It's a Batman film that seems to hate Batman, and when he does show up, he is defeated almost instantly, thrown away, and its politics are so hilariously muddled, where you're like, what are you trying to say?
Well, yeah, it's like, the idea is...
Do you remember when they were going to film Occupy Wall Street protesters and put it in the movie?
I wish they had, just to, like, fuck people up even more. But... like,
they're the problem.
The whole thesis of the movie is that the Gotham upper class has let down the people by closing the orphanages and not having a social safety net. And so what's the solution to this? Well, we'll give power back to the rich, but they got to be very careful this time and turn Wayne Manor into an orphanage.
Yeah.
That'll fix it.
It's the classic Philosopher King scenario,
Yeah.
right? Where, the will of the people are too chaotic and they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you have to give it to some smart people like Batman, who will be able to fix things.
Yeah, so I don't like his worldview.
But I like Batman Begins.
Fun movie.
That movie is dumb, fun. I remember Christian Bale describing it at the time as like Batman meets 36 Chambers of Shaolin on acid.
That's so stupid.
Why? That's great!
I just don't like it when people say, on acid to talk about.
I get that's fine. But it is kind of.
Kind of.
I think your Christopher Nolan hate is still bubbling to the surface. And
Well-
any slight mistake that someone else would make, Nolan, it's magnified 100-fold for you. And I'm not even that big of a Christopher Nolan defender.
Batman Begins is fun. It was kind of riding that post-Matrix wave of every movie's got to have like kung fu stuff in it. So,
Love it.
So now we find out that after 70 years of Batman existing, apparently he actually had like samurai training in the.
I thought he
Far East.
always did in the comics.
Did he?
Yeah,
Okay.
he did he trained in the Orient and stuff like that.
right.
So, but I want to just kind of take Christopher Nolan's technique in Batman Begins and compare it to Batman Dark Knight Rises, and that's his approach to action. Because in Batman Begins, the action is incomprehensible.
Yes.
Like, you do not know what's going on. I remember as a kid pausing and going frame by frame through cuts to see, like, is it me? Like, do I not know what's going on? And it's not me. He cuts it in a way where actions don't follow each other in an almost Michael Bay way, if you will, to create more of a sense of feeling as opposed to being able to follow it. But then in The Dark Knight Rises, holy shit. He took the incredibly wrong lesson, which is he pulls the camera far back and shoots all the action as in wides. So it's boring as fuck. Yeah. Like, it's so boring.
I remember watching it for the first time, and during that big action finale where it's the bat plane and everything flying through Gotham, I remember being very kind of awed by it, just by the scale of it. And I think Christopher Nolan, with The Dark Knight Rises and maybe with some of his other movies, he actually wants to intimidate the audience by making his films both enormously scaled and, in the case of The Dark Knight Rises, hard to follow.
Yes.
So it's like hard to follow, and he wants it to be hard to follow. He wants it to be, it's purposefully
because it's like a challenge,
obscure.
right?
Yeah, and I think it's a cheap way to make his movie look deeper than it is.
Agreed.
And I think he's also, in addition to that, he's guilty of relying on all these kind of like screenwriting 101 gimmicks. Like, there's always like a ticking time bomb thing in a lot of his later movies. And he's always doing this thing where he's cutting back and forth between 3 different
incidents going on at the same time to create
kind of,
tension.
Yeah, to manufacture kind of an artificial drama.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, Dark Knight Rises, once again, is not good. And I think it is a result of a filmmaker forced into the corner of people saying that the Dark Knight was one of the best movies of all time, to the point that it was nominated for an Oscar for Best Picture.
It wasn't.
Oh, I thought it was.
No, in fact, that's why they expanded it from 5 movies to like actually that's the reason, because the next year after that they expanded it to 10 movies.
You know what? That's what the internet has done to me. I believed it had been nominated.
But it did win an Oscar for supporting actor for Heath Ledger, posthumously,
that's right,
famously.
posthumously, yeah.
And he's very good in the film.
Oh, he's great in the movie.
I didn't revisit The Dark Knight for this podcast, but I think I would still think it was okay.
I remember liking it, but not loving it, and being a little bit confused at the love for it.
I was 19 at the time, so I was, pretty...
Smart.
I was pretty smart,
Yep.
so I was pretty open to a movie like this, and I thought it was great. I thought it really caught the zeitgeist.
I remember it was too long, too muddled, and not as fun as Batman Begins.
I think it really showed that a superhero movie could be a real movie, too. And move over, Heat, because we've got The Dark Knight now.
Well, Christopher Nolan, we haven't talked about the fact that one of the reasons that he makes himself feel important is also his obsession with all this technological trickery, right? So it's like, I'm gonna shoot these scenes in IMAX.
Yeah.
And like, this hasn't been done on the big screen in forever. I'm only gonna shoot film because that's the real format that artists use.
I admire his advocacy for
Yeah.
film. I saw Dunkirk in 70mm this week.
Yeah, so did I.
And I thought it looked beautiful.
I mean, it does, but it's...
Well, the movie didn't, but the film looked great. It was great seeing, like, the way colors look in 70mm. Like,
Yeah.
blues and blacks look different.
So, you saw Dunkirk, I saw Dunkirk. I like Dunkirk. You did not like Dunkirk.
It's not that I didn't like it. I was like right in the middle on it.
Yeah.
Frankly, I guess there's been a debate amongst people who've seen about whether it's cold or not, and I had trouble getting invested in the movie. Nolan makes this decision to not endow any of his characters with any kind of backstory,
Love it.
with any really personality. Yeah, okay, and I kind of respect it in the abstract, making it all about their situation, but I had trouble getting invested in it, and I had trouble, frankly, telling these kids apart.
Oh, really?
Yes,
You're
I
like,
did.
all these white kids look exactly the same.
Well, somebody whispered to me that's Harry Styles.
Well,
And then after 5 minutes, I forgot who he was.
I read a review that was like, listen, I see Harry Styles up on screen. I can't think of anyone else but Harry Styles. And I'm like, well, I don't know who that is.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm good.
yeah.
He's a singer in One Direction, I guess.
Whoever he was fine.
Yeah, he was good. I think that what I enjoyed the most about that movie is it's obviously a reaction to Interstellar, which was big and complicated, is that he tried to do something simpler, which I'm always a big fan of. And the kind of broader strokes, the emotional strokes, they work on me because I am a simple man. My love for action films, the definition of that is the broad kind of emotional strokes
The action's
of
pretty good.
storytelling. Yeah, and I love the decision not to show any enemy soldiers. That's great. Love that. And that at the end of the day, the film was about not fighting in a war, but retreating from a war. And that, like, there's no real combat that's going on in that film, right? It's people that are basically just about to be killed and them just getting out of that situation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting... Because I remember when the film was coming out, all the stuff I just praised about the film is the stuff that made me go, wow, that trailer's boring. I don't want to see that. Even though it's weird that for a war film, none of the main characters die.
I know people have said it, but it's true. It's pretty bloodless.
Yeah, it is, which is kind of a weird decision to do if you're telling 3 stories and that everybody just makes it fine at the end.
Yeah. I also think, this is unrelated, but I also think Christopher Nolan, even though he uses film, he's not a very imaginative visual storyteller.
No, I don't think he is, and I think that relates to the fact that he approaches his films, which I read online that he draws a lot of graphs when he talks about story and and
Everything about this guy.
I think that that's why it's like Inception is a film about dreams, right? But the decision he makes is
Anyway.
to ground them all in this kind of blander visual style. Like, there's nothing in Inception that would blow you away in a way that something like Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, you'll be like, that's fun. There's nothing like that in Inception.
I would take any Nightmare on Elm Street movie, except possibly Freddy's Dead, over Inception.
I like Inception. I think it's a lot of fun.
I think Inception, I think it's such a wasted opportunity to make a movie about dreams and make it like this. I mean, this is a movie where Leonardo DiCaprio has locked, so we're in Leonardo DiCaprio's head, and he's locked his dead wife in the sub-basement of his dream so she can't escape. It's like, that's not how dreams work.
I think...
And people dream just like bland office corridors.
Yeah, but don't they? Isn't that like people usually dream pretty blandly? I'm not trying to defend Christopher Nolan.
Yeah,
but I can see
they don't dream so literally.
But I can almost see when Inception came out, Will Sloan on the internet, looking at all these reviews come up that are like, oh, this is like a masterpiece. This is blowing my mind. And it just like, like the anger kind of like, it's like, no, it's not.
Yes.
Like, why is this the important film?
Yes, and also
Versus Jerry Lewis.
It's too long. Jerry Lewis is a master.
He is.
And his films truly are dreamscapes.
But anyway, continue.
It's just too long, and also the first hour of it is just unbelievably clunky. Just one long speech explaining the parameters of the dreamscape over and over and over again.
And it also does, I think, the greatest sin in the eyes of Will Sloan is that it thinks it's smart and it's dumb.
Yes.
Yes.
And also, no sex. Can I just say this about all of his movies? No sex.
There's no sex.
Where's the sex?
Which is funny because he does produce all the films with his wife.
Yeah.
So you'd think they'd bring like a little bit more steam.
I just think it's interesting. He's made like, what, 7 or 8 movies now?
Yeah.
Except for Batman, lingering in the afterglow with Marion Cotillard in the last one.
Yeah. But you want some like on-screen fucking, right?
Yeah, full penetration.
Christopher Nolan is the kind of man that would be, listen, if I'm going to tackle the subject, I haven't done it for all my previous films, I'm going to do it real.
Well, I just, like when I think of Inception, I just think of that scene where Ellen Page and Joseph Gordon-Levitt have that awkward kiss. And
filmed by a 12-year-old boy who's never kissed a woman.
Watching that and thinking, oh yeah, that's weird that this is the closest thing to kind of like a romantic thing in the movie. Despite everything I've said about Christopher Nolan in this episode, he's the kind of guy that you want to like because, as we're so relentlessly told over and over again,
he's great.
He's great. And also, he's the only guy who's making films at this level that aren't franchise movies and that are like personal films in some way. Mm-hmm. So what do you think of that?
I think that it's a noble effort, and you don't have to see his movies if you don't like them, but you will because...
Of course. If you care about movies, you got to reckon with Christopher Nolan.
But I think that the damage Christopher Nolan has done is with the Batman movies, especially Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises. For a long time, we were getting superhero movies that were all about, this ain't just for kids anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very toxic and horrible way to approach these kind of properties. And I'm glad that now that's pretty much over. Batman.
Now we're getting Deadpool instead, where it's like he's a superhero, but he jokes about cum.
That's not what I was talking about.
That's what I'm talking
about. More stuff like Wonder Woman or Spider-Man Homecoming, where it's fun,
more
right?
upbeat stuff. I liked Spider-Man Homecoming. I just want to say that on the air.
Before I wheel you off back to your old folks' home where we keep you. All right. So, Christopher Nolan, please don't send us your hate mail.
Let's get some 1-star reviews on iTunes right now.
No, please, no.
Do we have any letters this week?
Yes, we do. This letter is from Eddie Averill, and it goes, "Hey guys, I've been loving the podcast. The Edgar G. Elmer episode led me to some great films.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. Isn't it hilarious that the Edgar G. Elmer episode was one that we were like, I don't know if we should do it. Nobody will know who he is.
Yeah.
And then it's the episode that we get the most mail about, that people love Detour.
I love it.
He goes, would love an episode on Hong Sang-soo sometime, or a more popular pick, Paul Thomas Anderson. Keep up the good work, Eddie."
Let's do Paul Thomas Anderson when his new movie comes out.
Yeah, the one with the final performance of Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah,
let's do that.
All right.
Right on those coattails.
Hong Sang-soo, I don't know, maybe.
I like him.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would say about him.
We'll put him in the box.
That's right. Put it in the box.
Yeah.
And we also have a letter from longtime listener and friend of the podcast, Andrew Barr, which I mentioned on the previous episode. "Hey, Justin. Listening to you guys talk about Fan Expo, I just thought I'd point out that if you did make eye contact with me at my booth, I probably didn't guilt you into buying my book," which is what I said about last week. "I tend to not actually say much to people who stop at my table unless they start talking to me. Probably one of the reasons I don't do many conventions. I don't like when people bug me to buy their stuff on the convention floor, so I don't like to bug people who stop at my table. You bought my stuff because you wanted to, or to try and impress me for some reason. See you at Horrorama, where me and Andrew will be sharing a table. Thank you, Andrew Barr."
Well, you must feel pretty guilty now.
Nah, not really. I'm 100% sure that I probably picked up his book and went, "Oh, this looks cool." And he went, "Oh, yeah." And just those 2 words were like, "Oh, man, better buy this guy's books now." And you know what? They were tons of fun. Go visit Andrew Barr
Yeah.
official website and buy his product.
I do that all the time when I'm out at things. If I make eye contact,
Yeah, just eye contact, right? It doesn't even need to be talking.
they're not guilting.
No, yeah,
it's all me.
It's all me, and it's like, I feel a little bit bad about this person.
Also, if you're in Toronto, by the way, stop by the Royal Cinema and see all of Andrew Barr's art up there on the wall.
It's basically the Andrew Barr art installation at this point, because he does amazing posters for all the series that are shown at the Royal Cinema. He did a bunch of Laser Blast ones.
And he's also, I've been enjoying Andrew's Facebook page lately because he's been watching all the Ernest movies and including the really deep cut ones like Your World as I See It.
When Andrew goes into a subject, he will keep going down. Like, he watched all the Puppet Master films as well.
Oh, man.
So, like we said last week, we're doing a contest for Patreon subscribers this month. You could win one of 3 prizes, which include a copy of a movie that I made, all the zines that I published, about 6 issues that are not available anywhere at the moment.
And feature exclusive writing by Will Sloan.
And a mystery prize that will include a Batman Forever unopened trading card pack.
Oh, man.
And I'm not talking about a box. Like, it's like 12 trading cards.
But they're from the original release of the film.
Of Batman
It's not
Forever.
some
Yes,
hipster reprint.
And, a lot of people joined. I really appreciate it. Your name's going in the box to have the prize picked at the end of next week. But me and Will have something even more tantalizing to put on the table, which is we have 35 Patreon subscribers right now. If we get 50 Patreon subscribers by the end of the week, that gives you, if you're listening
The end of the week?
Yeah, Thursday. It has to be by the end of the month.
Okay.
So that's why, Will, it's really hard for them to do.
Okay, got it.
Because if you guys do that, someone commented on Patreon about the fact that they would love for us to do an episode on the Stephen Odenkirk thumb movies. So we did an episode on Patreon about Kung Pao Enter the Fist.
Great film.
Stephen Odenkirk, the director of that film and star and writer, is famous for making those movies that are thumbed with faces. You saw them at Rogers and Blockbuster. There's no way you didn't, right?
Bat Thumb, a Thumbtanic.
The Blair Thumb Project.
Oh, God.
I think there's 6 or 7 of them, and they're 20 minutes each. And if we get 50 Patreon subscribers by the end of this week, me and Will do a Patreon episode on the thumb films. And that means me and Will are going to watch all of them.
What do you want me to say?
Please don't.
Yeah, please don't.
But that means we need 15 people need to hand over $5 a month. Do you think that's going to happen?
I hope not. You and I, like a year ago, watched the Blair Thumb.
Oh my God.
It's one of the worst
I
things
fell
I've ever seen.
asleep and kept waking up, and I'm like, how is this not over
It's
yet?
only 20 minutes long.
We're going to have to watch them all.
Oh, hey, on the Patreon this week, we examine the Cinema du Brett Ratner with Rush Hour.
So for all the people that keep going, I can't wait for that Jackie Chan episode, we recorded a 20-something minute episode on Rush Hour, so you can get your taste right there.
Yeah. So what are we doing next week?
Next week, we're going to be doing the filmmaker that I did a trade-off for Christopher Nolan, which was, Will went, listen, if you do Christopher Nolan, we'll do Ernest Dickerson, who is the director of Juice, the film that starred Tupac Shakur, Demon Knight, a great...
Starring Dick Miller.
Yeah, horror comedy that was Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight. And he's probably most famous for being a cinematographer of all of Spike Lee's early works. So, like, Do the Right Thing, She's Gotta Have It, and his final project with him, which was Malcolm X.
He also directed Bulletproof with Adam Sandler.
Guess what? I watched it this week.
Don't say what you thought of it.
Yeah,
You gotta save it for next week.
I gotta save it for next week. And he's an interesting filmmaker that actually kind of went from a director of studio pictures to mostly doing television. Most famously, he directs a lot of big episodes of The Walking Dead, the show that I do not watch.
Okay.
But there were some great letters. Did you see those from Frank Darabont? Being like, I just watched the rushes for this episode, and did the director have a stroke or something? Like, it doesn't look like that they're able to direct at all. You can see all these letters that Frank Darabont wrote that were released in the court case that's currently going on.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's what we're going to do next week, an episode on Ernest Dickerson. And until then, you can ask us any questions, comments at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And my final plug, my partner Emily Milling is currently producing a web series that is doing a crowdfunding campaign called Allie and Lara Make a Horror Movie, about two women that try to make a horror movie. It's really all there in the title. And they're coming down to the final days. So if you could just check it out and it looks interesting to you, feel free to donate a little bit of money. My name's Justin DeClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
The last part is the what is the final the Prestige.
Oh man, we didn't even fucking talk about The Prestige and we both watched it.
We don't need to.
Oh, okay. So you had some adventures out of the city of Toronto this week.
I went to Montreal for the Fantasia Film Festival, but I went because Larry Cohen, the director of such films as Q, the Winged Serpent, and The Stuff,
previous Important Cinema Club subject,
was being presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award, and they were showing a documentary about him called King Cohen, and he was being reunited on stage with the Dietrich to his von Sternberg, the Klaus Kinski to his Werner Herzog, Michael Moriarty.
Everyone's favorite cranky Republican uncle.
Yes, but a late-in-life Republican.
Yeah.
And I will say that when Larry Cohen badmouthed Trump on stage, Michael Moriarty didn't say anything.
I guess he was just being polite.
Yeah. But Michael Moriarty, I think, is a great actor.
Fantastic actor.
Doesn't have all of his marbles. Listeners should go on YouTube and look up an appearance by Michael Moriarty on Open Mic with Mike Bullard from, I think, 1998. Oh, it's unbelievable. Seeing the two of them on stage was just...
brought a tear to your eye.
It basically did. It was just such a thrill. Michael Moriarty read a tribute to Larry Cohen, calling him the best director he's ever worked with.
Wow.
They did some, and calling Q, the Winged Serpent, the best performance he did in film. They did some shtick on stage together, some grumpy old men shtick. And also, I mentioned that Michael Moriarty doesn't have all of his marbles anymore. He spoke in a weird, affected British accent.
It really?
Yes.
Whoa.
Which was really weird because, like, early in his career, he had kind of a higher-pitched, honey-like voice. And then later in the 90s, after the cigarettes had started to take their toll, he talked like this. And now he talks kind of like this.
That's so weird.
Yeah, it's really, really weird.
What about the documentary, Will?
I don't want to talk about the documentary. The documentary had some good stories in it.
But me and you got to go see a movie last night, which was Wolf Warrior 2.
Okay, so we had the greatest double feature last night.
God.
We'll start with Wolf Warrior 2. This was yours. I didn't know about this movie, but it was playing at the Young Dundas.
Yeah. Wolf Warrior 1 I had seen. It came out a few years ago. It was a film that was notable for starring Wu Jing, also known as the main fighter that Donnie Yen fights in SPL. He's also the star of SPL 2. And in Wolf Warrior, he directed, wrote it, starred, choreographed the action. Scott Adkins was the villain in the movie, who regular listeners to this podcast know that I love. Movie's not that good. Fairly disappointing.
And it's a Chinese film.
Yeah, Chinese film. Yeah. Very propagandistic, like all about, China. Massive hit in its home country. Mm-hmm. So when the second one was announced that it was coming out, I was like, who cares? I don't like the first one, so I'm probably not going to check it out. But then reviews started trickling through that it was like a big action movie. Like they actually went in and like made it exciting this time, and it had martial arts in it. So I decided, all right, let's get the gang together. Will, Peter Kaplowski, Steve Kostansky, Pierce Sturks, we're all going to go and watch Wolf Warrior 2. Hopefully it won't disappoint.
And it was really fun.
It's so much fun. I cannot think of the last time that I saw a movie that big, dumb, action-packed, and genuinely fun. Like, not Michael Bay, like, this is bad, but I'm still finding it amusing fun.
Well, also, I'm so tired of, like, you and I will go see Chinese action movies at the Young and Dundas all the time, and they're all so boring.
Yes.
They're all 2.5 hour, like, historical propaganda films, and this one is an exploitation movie.
Straight. It's a canon film. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's action-packed, it's super violent, it's very problematic.
Yes.
A lot of it is set in Africa, and there are, like...
I have to say that the actual African people are not portrayed in a racist light. Like, there's no stereotypical caricatures. The issue is that they are mowed down like they are nothing endlessly.
Yeah.
Like, the movie feels the need that before you can have Wu Jing kind of, like, let loose and start killing bad guys in hilariously creative ways, which includes breaking through a window, catching a piece of glass in the air as he falls to slit someone's neck. He needs to witness about 300 African people get killed.
But like this kind of reminds me of what Hong Kong movies used to be in the 80s and 90s, dumb and full of action and really violent and offensive.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But still, like, well made enough and creative enough and filled with hilarious melodrama.
Yes.
Like, that's something that I miss from, like, Hong Kong action movies of these days, is they're often, like, very slight in the way they portray stuff, while, like, Wolf Warrior 2 has a reveal happen that is done in the most hilarious way. And it's also a film that has a climax that goes on and on and on in ways that I haven't really seen in Chinese cinema in a really long time. And also great action scenes, including a hilarious one-take opening sequence that has the best underwater fighting you will ever see.
I remember seeing that and thinking, God, if this movie can't possibly keep this up. It's going to get boring really soon.
And you know what? It never got boring.
Yeah.
I was never bored watching the movie.
Also, a lot of guilos.
Oh, that's the best part. All the villains are Americans in a way that I guess is supposed to be kind of offensive in the modern day parlance, because like it insinuates that the Americans are the bad guys, to the point that Frank Grillo from the Purge series, who's the main villain, at one point goes, "You're just inferior to us."
Yeah. Well,
it's fun. I love it.
It's
I love
fun,
that
and
shit.
I like white guy actors who look like they found them at the bus station and were
Yes.
like, "Hey, want to be in a movie?"
Well, all the villains in this movie are all stuntmen and not actors, which is great.
So then from there, we went straight to the Lightbox to see a little movie called Hard Boiled on 35 millimeter.
Yeah, John Woo's magnum opus, the best action film of all time. Does it hold up? Yeah, well, of course it does. It's the best action film of all time.
And, it was great to see. It was a sold-out screening. All of the Toronto people were there.
Well, the Will Sloan podcast family was there.
Yeah, Luke Savage was there. You were there. My whole podcast universe was there.
And it was a fun time. Like I said twice before, it's the best action film of all time. There's nothing subjective about it. Like, if someone... I actually heard some people not very impressed by the movie when they were leaving the theater, and...
What do you want?
Yeah, like, those people are dumb. Like, they were like, why is the movie called Hard Boiled?
Oh, come on. Come on.
And I think the surprising thing is that when Colin Getty, the former Midnight Madness programmer who introduced the screening, said, "Who hasn't seen Hard Boiled?" seemingly half the audience raised their hand.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Which, I just gotta say, if you're listening to this and you like action movies, like, I can understand if you don't like them, like they're not your thing. But if you like them and you have not seen John Woo's Hard Boiled, you need to go see it right now.
As I was watching this movie, I've seen it 10 times.
Yeah.
And yet, whenever I see that hospital battle, I'm still always thinking, God, I hope they don't kill the babies.
It is a movie.
And I'm always shocked at that part where people are running out of the hospital and the villains mow them down.
Yes.
I always find that upsetting.
It's a movie that Michael Bay took all the wrong lessons from, because for all intents and purposes, Hard Boiled is one amazing shot after the other.
Oh, yeah.
But it tells a story in the way that it uses those shots. And that's why it's the greatest.